So is dirty bulking worth it? Is it worth it to eat a lot of food and put on a lot of body weight over a short period of time to put on more muscle? Now, sure, we've all heard it that you can't force feed muscle growth, and muscle is only going to grow so slow anyway, and trying to speed up that process by pounding a lot of food is only going to result in you getting fat. But is it really true though? Or is it just one of those overly conservative notions that evidence-based professionals are throwing out to sound super smart? Is it like one of those ideas that if you're training more than 2 days a week, then you're already overtraining? You know, a part of me always wondered about this. After all, pretty much anybody with a great physique today, at one point or another, has done a really dirty bulk. Now sure, now they say that it was a mistake and they regret it, but is it akin to a now millionaire 30-year-old talking about how it was a mistake to be a workaholic when they were 25 years old? Like sure, now you regret it, but at the same time, it kind of gave you everything that you now have. So I decided to take this to the test, and from late November until about late March, I went on a serious bulk, and I put on about 9 kilograms, so about 20 pounds of body weight over the course of 4 months. Was it worth it? Not really. But before I get into the details, my name is Abel, and if this video topic sounds interesting to you and you're interested in more videos like this in the future, consider subscribing and hitting that bell notification icon, and that way YouTube is going to recommend my videos to you and I won't have to do super clickbaity thumbnails such as this one for that to happen. But back to the dirty bulking thing, let's look at the cost-benefit analysis of this purely in terms of pure math. Over the course of 4 months, so 16 weeks, I put on 9 kilograms, so almost 20 pounds of body weight. Before the start of the bulk, I was at around 9% body fat and around 83 kilograms. So if you do the math, my lean body mass was at around 75.5 kilograms. After that, I went on this 4-month-long bulk with high volume training, which I fed with a lot of food. And at the end of that, I was at around 92 kilograms. Now, once I was done with the bulk, I completed a 5-week-long mini cut, and at the end of that, I was at 87 kilograms at around 12% body fat. So if once again you do the math, my lean body mass at this point was at around 76.5 kilograms. So that gives us a total net muscle growth of around 1 kilogram. Assuming that most or all of that came throughout the actual bulk, that means that I put on 9 total kilograms of weight, 1 total kilogram of muscle, and 8 kilograms of fat. That is just not very good. Now, don't get me wrong, as you're becoming a more advanced lifter and you're approaching your genetic ceiling, the ratio of fat to muscle growth is always going to be unfavorable. You're no longer going to gain at a 1-to-1 ratio of fat to muscle. You're not even necessarily going to gain at a 2-to-1 ratio of fat to muscle. But an 8-to-1 ratio is just hard to justify. A 4-to-1 to 5-to-1 ratio is much more reasonable. And had I shot for such a ratio, that would have meant that I could have only bulked up to 88 kilograms, at which point I would have been at around 13% body fat and probably could have gained the same amount of muscle. At that point, I could have decided to do a 2 to 3 week long, really short mini cut, go back down to 10-11% body fat and keep bulking. Or I could have actually bulked up to 92 kilograms over the course of 8 months as opposed to 4 months, and probably could have gained 2 kilos of muscle instead of just 1. Whichever way you're twisting the equation, it seems like it was just not worth it to gain so much body weight for the amount of muscle that I could gain in this time frame. So that is perhaps the number one conclusion you're all wondering about. Purely in terms of the muscle growth that I could eke out in this time frame, it was not worth it to dirty bulk. But there are a few other important lessons that I want to share with you. The next one is that while pounding tons of food and gaining body weight super fast was just silly, being at a slightly higher body fat percentage was actually beneficial. As I went from 9% body fat up to 10% to 11% to 12% to 13 to 14%, I actually kept feeling better and better. At 9% body fat, I just felt a bit frail, not very energetic, overly food-focused and hungry. As I started to go higher in body fat and I kept eating in a calorie surplus, I started to feel more and more indestructible, for lack of a better term. I felt more energetic, my sleep was less easily disturbed, I had more motivation to move around spontaneously, everything was just better. And that lesson for me is perhaps just as important as the lesson about the fat to muscle ratio I could expect, is that there is just no good damn reason for me to get down to 9% body fat to start a lean gaining phase. Earlier on, I thought that my ideal body fat percentage range would be somewhere between 8 and 12% body fat. Now it really seems like it's more so between 12% body fat and 16% body fat. Now, another important point on this though is that this didn't mean that there was a linear relationship in the amount of body fat I gained and the amount of food I gained and how good I felt. Sure, as I went from 9% body fat up to maybe 14% body fat, I kept feeling better and better, but as I went from 14% to 15 to 16 to 17% body fat, at a certain point, my well-being didn't keep increasing. In fact, at a certain point, this increase in well-being started to reverse. At the peak of my bulk, when my body fat levels were at their highest, I started to become less energetic, more sluggish, wasn't as motivated to move around spontaneously. I just didn't feel that good anymore. So there is a healthy balance. It's not the case that more body fat and more food is good and less body fat and less food is bad. There is a healthy balance somewhere in between. Now this brings me to another point, which is as I progressed with my bulk, at a certain point I basically lost all my hunger signals and my satiety signals were just maximized at all times. I basically woke up full in the morning, I wasn't hungry whatsoever, I was no longer looking forward to my meals, and I just didn't enjoy the act of eating as much anymore. Now for me, someone with a history of chronic dieting and developing some pretty funky relationships with food, I used to think that a life without hunger would be the best life ever. But interestingly, that turned out not to be the case. In fact, I would go so far as to say that at a certain point, I started missing feeling a bit hungry sometimes, and I started missing looking forward to my next meal. And if you think about it, is looking forward to a nice, nutritious, healthy meal a bad thing? No. I mean, that is one of the most naturally built-in fun things that we have in life. The fact that we are looking forward to eating a nice plate of food and that we enjoy every bite that we eat. So once again, it's not the case that no hunger and no food focus is good and hunger and food focus is just a bad thing, period. There is a healthy balance in between. Sure, too much hunger and too much food focus is a bad thing and that is debilitating. It sucks out productivity and the enjoyment of life, but just the right amount of it is actually making life more enjoyable. In fact, it has a bit of a weird productivity boosting inspirational effect that is a bit hard to explain. Now, one really interesting and beneficial thing that I found is that at a certain point, I became completely detached from my body image and from my leanness. You see, in my previous years, I usually stayed in between 9% body fat and maybe 13% body fat. And as soon as I started going over that 13% body fat mark, I felt the urge to diet back down a little bit, to get to a more aesthetic looking body fat percentage range. Now, sure, for most of you, you will look your best in between about 8 to maybe 12, 13% body fat. And sure, it looks awesome. It has a lot of benefits. For example, when you're in a boring business meeting, you can just quickly go to the bathroom, pull up your shirt, look at your abs, and that gives you some nice encouragement and motivation. And all of a sudden, you have the energy to sit through the rest of that meeting. Or even in the winter months, you can always hope that your rich friend who has an indoor swimming pool is finally going to organize an indoor pool party and you can finally show off your physique. It has a lot of benefits. But at the same time, being at that very aesthetic body fat percentage range kind of makes it more difficult to adopt a more performance-oriented mindset and focus on your gym performance and what is best for your progress in the long term. And so what I found is that once I got over 12%, 13% body fat, for one, fat gain just wasn't as visually striking anymore, even though I objectively put on body fat because my scale weight went up and I could feel that I put on body fat. In the mirror, it just wasn't that discouraging anymore because I was past that range where I was really lean and every bit of additional fat gain was just really visually striking. And so at that point, it was much easier to let go all of that and focus on what's happening in the gym and what's going to be best for my progress in the long term and what's going to help me to grow in the best way possible. Now for closing, I want to leave you with one thing, and that is what I would do differently if I did this bulk all over again. And that is preserving my good eating habits that helped me over the course of my fitness journey. Because probably the number one thing that led me to gain needless amounts of fat and keep gaining weight at an irresponsible rate was that I let go of some of my keystone eating habits and I was no longer eating like an adult. And I think that is the number one mistake that we all fall for in our fitness journey, is that we either eat like a prisoner during cutting when we are deprived of food, or we eat like a child on the other hand when we are bulking with no forethought and no sense of responsibility. I really firmly believe that just by keeping in some of those keystone habits that help me over time, such as eating mindfully, such as making the best food choices for the most part, of course, and auto-regulating my food intake if I go out to a restaurant and I significantly overshoot my rough calorie target, I would have instinctually prevented me from putting on the amount of needless fat that I did. So if you're going on a bulk, feed your body, feed the process of muscle growth. Your hunger levels will naturally increase as you're training with higher volumes, as you're giving a stimulus for your body for growth. And I recommend that you don't try to find this increase in hunger. Give your body the fuel it needs, but do so in a responsible manner. Eat the amount that you feel you need, but eat like an adult. Don't eat like a child with no sense of responsibility. And don't be like a kid let into Disneyland who can't handle the freedom all of a sudden. So that would be my overall conclusion. Dirty bulking is probably just silly if you're a fairly advanced lifter already, but there are some positives and some negatives that came from this experience. Now, if you're curious about all of this in much more detail and you want to learn about the details about why I did what I did and about the specifics of my strategy, I wrote a really long monster of an article that I will link in the show description below, and feel free to read that. But for now, these would be the cliff notes from my recent dirty bulking experiment. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then consider subscribing to be up to date for more videos like this. Some cool expert interview is gonna come in the next couple of days, so be sure that you're up to date on that one as well. And with that, I wanna thank you for your attention and see you next time.